The blazing sun hung high over the Texas plains, turning the land into shimmering gold. Cole Barrett rode slowly through the dry grass, his horse's hooves kicking up little clouds of dust. It had been a long day of work, fixing fences, checking water troughs, the kind of quiet labor that filled a man's days when he lived alone. The wind carried the faint scent of sagebrush and cattle, but then something else caught his attention. A faint cry. He pulled on the reins, his heart suddenly alert. Across the creek bed near a cluster of rocks, he saw a figure struggling to stand. A young woman, her dress torn and faded from the road, was limping, one hand clutching her ankle. Cole urged his horse forward and jumped down before it even stopped moving. "Easy there, ma'am," he said, voice steady but full of concern. "What happened?" Her lips trembled. "Snake. It bit me," she whispered, pointing to her leg. 2 red punctures marked her skin, already swelling, the color darkening by the second. She was pale, too pale, and trembling. Cole's stomach tightened. He'd seen snake bites before. He knew what they could do, and he also knew how little time they had. "Don't move," he said firmly, tearing a strip from his shirt and kneeling beside her. Her eyes fluttered, dazed with pain. She tried to speak, but her voice failed. The world was spinning for her, the heat, the venom, the fear. Cole glanced around. The land stretched endless in every direction. No doctor for miles. "You're gonna be all right," he murmured, more to convince himself than her. He gently lifted her into his arms, her light frame against his chest, and carried her toward the shade of a mesquite tree. His jaw was set, his mind racing. There was no one else out here. If she was going to live, it was up to him. As the wind stirred the dust and the prairie sun burned above them, the lonely rancher felt something unfamiliar, a desperate need to save a stranger's life. Cole laid Eliza gently in the shade beneath the mesquite tree, its thin branches trembling in the hot wind. Her breathing had grown shallow, and beads of sweat traced down her pale forehead. The venom was spreading fast. He could see it in the angry red swelling creeping up her leg. He knelt beside her, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "Stay with me, ma'am," he murmured, trying to sound calm, though his heart thudded against his ribs. "I've got you." He tore another strip from his sleeve and tied it firmly above the bite, tightening it just enough to slow the poison spread. Eliza winced, biting her lip to stop a cry. Her hands clutched at the dirt, her knuckles white. "It's swelling fast," Cole said under his breath. He could almost feel the heat of the venom radiating from her skin. He knew what he had to do, though the thought made his throat tighten. "Forgive me, ma'am," he said softly. He lifted her dress just above her knee, exposing the wound. For a moment he hesitated. She was trembling, half-conscious, but her eyes flickered open just enough to meet his. There was no judgment in her gaze, only trust and fear mingled together. That look gave him the courage he needed. He bent down, pressed his lips to the bite, and began to draw the poison out. The metallic taste burned on his tongue, but he kept going, sucking, spitting again and again, fighting for her life. The wind howled through the prairie grass, the sound of it mixing with the frantic beat of his pulse. When he looked up, her face was ghostly pale, but her breathing had steadied just a little. "You hang on," he whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Don't you give up now," she managed to whisper, her voice barely a thread. You saved me." He shook his head, tightening the bandage once more. "Not yet, ma'am," he said quietly. "But I aim to." Then, as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the land, Cole lifted her into his arms again and started toward his cabin. He didn't know if she'd make it, but he'd be damned if he let her die out there alone. The evening settled soft and slow over the plains. The sky streaked with gold and rose as the sun sank behind the distant hills. The storm clouds that had gathered earlier now drifted away, leaving behind the scent of wet earth and the hush of a land finally cooling. After a long, burning day, Cole sat near the small fire outside his cabin, the flames crackling gently as they threw light against the wooden walls. Beside him, wrapped in a blanket, Eliza lay resting on a bed of straw and quilts he'd pulled from his own cot. Her breathing was steady now, her skin no longer pale but touched with a faint flush of warmth. Every few minutes, Cole looked over at her just to be sure that she was still there, still alive. He had cleaned the wound again, washed away the dust and blood with careful hands. The swelling had gone down some, though the mark still looked angry and raw. He'd done all he could. Now it was up to her strength, and perhaps a little grace from above. The crackle of the fire filled the silence. The wind whispered across the grass, carrying the soft chirp of crickets. Cole leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hat resting in his hands. He wasn't used to company, not since his wife passed years ago, not since the ranch had grown quiet. And now, out of nowhere, a stranger had come into his life, bleeding and broken, and somehow she had stirred something in him he thought long dead. When Eliza stirred, her eyes fluttering open, he straightened quickly. She blinked, taking in the soft glow of the fire, the stars beginning to appear overhead. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse but calm. "My cabin," he said gently. "You're safe now. I did what I could." Her gaze found him, tired, worn. Dust still on his face, and a faint smile tugged at her lips. "You stayed," she said quietly. He nodded once. "Couldn't just ride off. Not after what happened." For a long moment neither spoke. The fire popped, and the sky deepened to indigo. Then she said, almost to herself, "You saved my life." Cole looked into the flames. "Maybe, or maybe you just fought harder than most." Her smile grew a little. "Still, thank you, Mr. Barrett." He met her eyes at last, the faintest smile crossing his own. "Cole," he said simply. "Just Cole." A soft laugh escaped her, weak but real. "Then thank you, Cole." The firelight flickered between them, warm and alive. Out beyond the cabin, the land stretched wide and silent, endless, wild and full of mystery. But for the first time in years, Cole didn't feel the weight of its emptiness. He tossed another log on the fire, leaned back, and looked up at the stars. Somewhere between danger and dusk, something had changed, not just in her but in him too. The lonely rancher who had spent years talking only to... The wind had found a reason to hope again.